Today I'm going to be running through Apocalypse's abilities as fast as possible. As always, there is a link to the champion spotlight in the description if you'd like to read through his abilities yourself, and a timestamp if you want to jump ahead to my first thoughts and impressions. That said, let's dive right in. Now, Apocalypse is a mutant champion with an attack of 2,279, very low, a health pool of 37,495, top 5, and a PI of 10,650, top 5 as well. He has a passive called Genetic Enhancement, which is a max 4 stacks. He starts each quest with 1 persistent genetic code, 2 if defending, and 3 if defending a final node. Knocking out a non-#robot opponent grants 1 genetic code, and starting a fight versus a mutant grants 2 genetic code. You start the fight with 1 indefinite passive 40% prowess for each genetic code. At 3+, he becomes stun immune while striking, and at 4+, striking the opponent's block with a light attack inflicts a 0.8 second stun debuff on a 12-second cooldown. This also has no effect versus well-timed blocks. He has another passive for it called Total Molecular Control, where he develops immunity to bleed, incinerate, and disorient effects over 8 seconds while suffering from them, and these immunities will persist for the entire quest. Each time the opponent evades, he gains a plus 10% chance to bypass evade. This also persists through the quest. And then finally, the last pass is opponents suffer 100% reduced purification ability accuracy reduction. This is like Kingpin or Korg. His heavy attacks, both hits inflict a 7-second bleed and refresh personal weakness, poison, concussion, and degeneration effects on the opponents. His special attacks, if the opponent is suffering from a damage over time effect, the debuffs trigger on activation and are 30% longer. Each hit also deals a burst of physical damage for each personal weakness, poison, concussion, or degeneration on the opponent. If he's fighting a mutant, he triggers both effects of his special attacks instead. Now, his special attacks inflict a debuff based on whether or not his last light or medium attack was thrown. It excludes heavies. Now, if it was a light attack, he applies a non-stacking 25% 25-second weakness on special 1, and if it's a medium attack, a non-stacking 25-second poison. For his special 2, on a light attack last thrown, he applies a non-stacking 35% 25-second concussion, and if it was a medium thrown, he applies a non-stacking 25-second degeneration. His special 3 refreshes all personal weakness, poison, concussion, and degeneration effects, re-triggering them at 100% increased potency and pausing them indefinitely. The potency increase does not stack. If none of the above debuffs are active, he inflicts 2 at random. He is a pre-fight / crossfight where once per quest, Apocalypse consumes 4 genetic codes to place a crossfight on the next fight. The next mutant, excluding Apocalypse to enter the fight, becomes a Horseman of Apocalypse for the rest of the quest, and they gain 100% bleed resistance, an indefinite 50% prowess, plus 30% offensive ability accuracy reduction, and 2 seconds of unblockability when the opponent purifies a debuff. They also, once per fight, gain 3 seconds of unstoppability when struck. His awaken ability is when Apocalypse doesn't participate in a fight, he heals at the start of the next fight he starts. The heal value stacks twice, and that is Apocalypse abilities as fast as possible with a few hiccups here and there. That said, there are quite a few things. First off, man, I thought Kabam was trying to make these champions less complicated. This is like one of the most complicated kits, and just unnecessarily so. Like, I really don't think it needed to be this complicated. There are just a lot of things I think could have been avoided. I think they could have made it so, like, I don't even know. I think it's cool that he applies these 4 different kinds of debuffs, but like just the complexity and the thought process and the ramp up there is ridiculous. Like, my gut instinct seeing this guy is that the coolest part about him is the pre-fight crossfight. If it wasn't for the pre-fight crossfight, I'm just so underwhelmed by these other special attack benefits, the like crazy low health pool he has, crazy low attack pool he has. He has like a crazy high attack pool. I'm just not impressed by like so many of these things. I see extra complexity that just seems so unnecessary, and it just blows my mind. So I gotta take it like one step at a time. So first off, they go knocking out a non-robot. Now, that's understandable, I get it, but they could have just said, knocking out an opponent. They didn't need to put the non-robot. They could have put, and I know this is going to apply with more than robots, but they could have just put, this doesn't work if he has class disadvantage, right? Because he's a mutant champion. Most of the robots, except for Dragon Man now, are tech champions, so he would have been able to have that. I think the biggest thing is like the Ultron drones do have different classes in Alliance Quest, but I don't think people are going to be using him for Alliance Quest that's just my opinion. So I think it's something they could have done. It would have made it sound a little bit less complicated, only because that's an effect that we're already used to in the game. But yeah, it's not that big of a deal. This is just where it starts. I will say I absolutely hate this. I already ranted about it. I hate defender-only abilities. Stop it. Stop doing this garbage. It's garbage. So they have this becomes 2 if defending and 3 if defending a final boss node garbage. Not a fan. I really hate that. I hate seeing it in here, and I know why they did it. It's because of this 3+ and 4+ genetic code where he becomes stun immune while striking. That means if he's the final boss on a quest, he's stun immune. And that means they can put a stun immune boss there without putting a stun immune node. So just having him there is a frustration within itself. And I just hate that. I think it's so incredibly unnecessary, and I'm not a fan. It's very clearly a defender ability. I don't think this guy is going to be like an amazing Alliance War boss, because the Alliance War bosses are already stun immune, so this is literally just for questing purposes. And I just think it's dirty. I think it's really poor. I think it's unnecessarily complicated, and I really hate it. And I hate to really get down on that, because it's negativity that I don't like to bring to the game, but sometimes I just see it, and this is a trend that we've had on the last like 12 champions, and we've just reached a point where even like my air of optimism is past. Like I just cannot excuse it anymore. At this point, it's just ridiculous. So that said, I'll move on to other parts of his kit, because some of it is pretty cool. Passive prowess is neat, especially with things like Special Connoisseur. They do actually specifically mention it, and that has a lot of potential. His starting attack rating isn't super high, so I don't know how meaningful this is going to be at 1, but at 4 prowesses, 160% just like indefinite passive prowess is definitely substantial. So he should hit hopefully decently hard, but you know, 160% increase of bad damage is still bad damage. So we'll have to wait and see how much damage his specials do in general. I think that next up is the total molecular control. Now, he gains these immunities over the course of the fight. Now, in one regard, I think it's neat, because that means you can use bleed, incinerates, and disorients against him as a defender, and you'll get about 8 seconds of value out of them. And I don't know if that means it stacks up like Taskmaster, where it's 10 debuffs, or if it's like the bleed, incinerate, or disorient has to last 8 seconds, which means bleeds, incinerates, and disorients that last less than 8 seconds won't cause them to go immune. I'm not entirely sure of the interaction. I'll have to wait and see, but I'm just going to be honest, they could have just given him flat immunity. I don't think this is a well thought out mechanic. I think it could have just been completely avoided. Maybe I'm missing something. Maybe there's some key reason for this that I'm not aware of, but my gut instinct is to say that this is just unnecessary. If you wanted him to bleed, incinerate, and disorient immune, or have the potential for it, just make him bleed, incinerate, and disorient immune, or make it part of his persistent charges and genetic codes and stuff, right? Like at 2, he becomes bleed immune, at 3, he becomes incinerate immune, and at 4, he becomes disorient immune. Something along those lines. I just think that it could have been less complicated than this. But it's a neat ability. I don't know how relevant it is, because 8 seconds of a big bleed is still a really long time to be hurting, but on an 8-second bleed or incinerate that is not as meaningful, or maybe it's like a global, like a 60-cent countdown, that's 8 seconds of 100% of your health divided by 60% or 60 seconds, and that's, while it's a substantial amount for permanent immunity, actually isn't that bad. So I think that's neat as well. I just think it could have been simpler. And then this, each time the opponent evades, gain plus 10% chance to bypass evade. That's a cool way to apply it. It's not like the most relevant. I don't foresee people using him as an anti-evade anytime in the future, but hey, maybe I'm wrong. You know, it's not hard for some situations like Mixmaster where you're triggering evade a lot in order to really benefit there, but usually when they put a node where you can reliably cause the opponent to evade, there's some kind of punishment for having them evade as well, so it's not ideal. That's just like my impression there. I don't think this is overall a good ability, but there might be application, and it should be noted in the future that it might be relevant. But my gut instinct is to say not a good use of passive there either. I do think the opponents suffer 100% purification ability accuracy reduction is a really targeted thing, but I love it. This means masochism. You know, that means Kingpins and Korgs, and Agent Venoms as well. You know, just a little bit of frustration. I think that's really cool. Right now, Omega Red is like the first one I think of when I think about preventing those abilities from happening, so it's nice to have an addition here, even if you know, maybe the damage output isn't matching. Now, his heavy attacks, they state that it's a 2-hit, and they already state in the developer's note that you can chain that into a special attack, and it will still trigger your debuffs as well. So that's really, really cool on the interaction. Damage there isn't crazy, but it does refresh already long duration debuff effects and makes them last 30% longer. So that's nice as well. You're going to be doing a lot of heavy chain into specials here if you're using this guy. The burst of physical damage isn't the greatest either, but it's also important to recognize that this is times 4, so it does scale up to 2400 per hit. And I don't know if this is base damage or not, but it's probably not, because I don't think this guy's going to be great with Liquid Courage because of recoil. I think they might even recommend the Mastery Double Edge, but I'm gonna just throw a shot in the dark here and say not a good idea, because you need to throw at the very least a special 3, a special 1, and a special 2, and then cycle back to a special 3. So you're going to be tanking 2 specials worth of recoil, but ideally you're probably better off going like special 1, special 1, special 2, special 2, and then special 3. I think just because of like getting that earlier damage up front, it's going to be easier to juggle. So I don't think Double Edge is gonna be great. I just think you're gonna be suffering a lot from recoil, but hey, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe you're not throwing that out a lot, but it is nice to have at least here. That is a decent amount, especially if it scales with the increased damage if you happen to be running those masteries. Now, the special 1 and the special 2, this is where it gets complicated. In my as fast as possible, I took the if fighting and mutant triggers both. I think that should have been up here. It would have just made clarity of the champion easier, and it would have made it more succinct to read through, so I added it in that regard. And then as well as the inflicts the debuff on light or medium attack, I think he could have put that up here as well. I also think it would have been cool if you could do lights or mediums to affect the special 3. Now, the special 3 applies random debuffs depending on how it is, but I think it would have been really, really cool, and it would have added a lot of potential to this guy if the buffs weren't random and it was targeted. Like if the last light/medium attack was a light attack, that's the utility, right? So, and weakness and concussion are not active, it will apply these instead. And if the last medium/light attack was a medium, that's the damage over time effects, and poison and degeneration are not active, it will apply these instead. And then it's not all 4, but you can get both with a special 3 rotation, and then that securely makes him friendly with recoil. And I think that would have been really, really cool. It is still a lot of workup, but it would have given you an alternative way to ramp him up without relying on throwing special 1s and special 2s, and still incorporates the light and medium attack thrown. I just think that's an easier way to do it, and it would have been really, really cool. But this is a still complicated but neat mechanic. I just wish that the rewards was a little bit more. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe the damage scaling here is a lot, but let's say you throw a special 3, a special 1, and a special 2, and then you cycle back to a special 3. Like, the number of champions who can take 6 bars of power, 6 bars of power, and just wreck with it before they're popping off. Talking like Corvus Glaive, Domino's 3 special 2s, Cap Infinity War 3 special 2s. Like, just the amount of value you have to compete with on that quantity of power. I'm not seeing the gains here. I'm not seeing the value in ramping him up, right? Like, I think the utility of weakness will be cool if people end up using this guy for Alliance Quest, for the node, the Resonant node, the one where people take Resonate, so they need weakness. I can't remember the node right now, but having access to a weakness is neat if the damage numbers are there. It does have access to poison. It's a pretty decent chunk of poison, and it is 25 seconds, and it's refreshable. So that's like pseudo-permanent if, you know, stackable. But it could be a little bit more valuable for the damage that it is, considering it's non-stacking. The concussion is just garbage. Anything that champion that can't access 100% ability accuracy reduction, like, you might as well not have it. 35% is good. That means he can be used for like magic if you can cycle up to a special 2 without taking too much limbo damage. And there are a lot of other champions where 35% ability accuracy reduction is enough. I'm just not a fan of 35%, even when it scales up to 70% after a special 3. Like, you gotta work up to a special 2 and then work up to a special 3 in order to access your ability accuracy reduction. It's just a lot of work. And it's not very reliable as far as utility goes. So it's a lot of of utility and a lot of potential degeneration and poison damage on specials, but it's a lot of work to get there, and because of that, that makes it not reliable. So I think the potencies could be a little bit higher. The degeneration is the only one where I'm like, okay, that's a reasonable quantity, but the duration, the 25 seconds, really solid. Given the fact that you have access to a very easy way to refresh them, I think this is really, really well balanced in that regard. So I'll just wait to see if the special 1 and the special 2 will have impactful quantities of damage, and see what he's like once he's ramped up. But it's gonna take a few minutes at least to like ramp this guy up properly, so it's just hard for me to get behind him. Like the fact that at best you got to throw a special 3, throw a special 1, throw a special 2, throw another special 3 to like get all 4 of your debuffs on there, and then like really feel the power from this guy. I'm just not impressed. I just feel like we're gonna see the same thing with Airwalker, where it's just like by the time you're popping off, other champions would have ended the fight, you know. So just seems like a little too much. It seems like it's a little too flashy for what it's worth, but hey, what do I know? Special 3 is pretty cool. 100% potency and pause indefinitely is really, really solid if he had a way to access these outside of specials. And the inflict 2 at random is neat as well. Now, I want to talk about probably the coolest part about this guy, and that's the pre-fight crossfight. This is the only thing that I like really vibe with. The rest is like, I've got so much negative to say about it. I'm just so not impressed. But the pre-fight crossfight is pretty badass. I mean, giving any mutant bleed resistance means that any mutant champion could be used to take down that crossbones fight. That opens up a lot of windows for opportunity. 50% increased special attack damage on any mutant is really sizable. I don't know how often the offensive ability actually comes into play, but it's neat and nice to have. And then unblockable for 2 seconds when they purify a debuff. It's a little more niche, but it's relevant. And the unstoppable for 3 seconds is just like a nice little Heimdall effect, but rather than like a saving grace, it's just like a, oh, if I mess up in general. So this is really cool. I'll need to wait and see how often it applies impact. I would have liked to see 100% bleed resist and poison resist, just to provide extra utility and just like extra cement value, because there's something to be said for resistances and having that value, because turning any mutant into a bleed and poison resist, even though a lot of them already are, but turning any mutant could provide a lot of potential in the future, where you just suck it up and you deal with 1 to 3 fights with this guy and you struggle through, or maybe you just bring him in to finish the fight, and then you have a souped up mutant. You know, that's not the worst thing in the world, and could be pretty neat, all things considered. His awaken ability is a cheeky little way to heal. I think it's really cool thematically, but I'm not impressed by that as well. And then he's got a ton of synergies, which are worth accounting for, but I will not be. That said, those are my first impressions. I hate to get super negative. This guy looks so badass, and I know people have been waiting for him, but I'm just not impressed. I hope I'm wrong. I really, really do, but it just seems like way too much effort for what it's worth. That said, though, let me know what you think. As always, though, I'll talk to y'all later. Peace.